Hi, Marcia. Hi, Anne.
Hi.
I'm here with Marcia Thompson and Ann Gordon. And in response to my request for folks to share their experiences related to civil and human rights, advocacy, activism, Anne and Marcia had explained to me that they had experiences through their church, working to support the Black empowerment, movements and things like that. And I'm probably not calling it the right thing, but I'm going to leave it to you ladies to remember your time.
Right. I just want to remind you, Marcia, that we've known each other for 55 years.
55?
Yes.
And it wasn't in the cradle either.
No, we both met at the Unitarian Church in Brooklyn Heights and got very involved in their social justice program. And this was in what, the middle 60s?
No.
70s?
When did you join the church?
66.
Yeah, it was in the
Right.
late 60s.
Yeah. And the church decided, after James Farmer, who was the head of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, put pressure on white churches and synagogues to make reparations. And this way he suggested was to, first of all, get rid of all their investments in South Africa, which our church endowment fund did immediately, and then to invest in the Black community. And this is the program that we got involved in.
Right. But I can't remember exactly. Your memory is better than mine. How we got started and the different things that we did.
Well, the Unitarian Church rented a storefront in Fort Greene, which at that time was a ghetto neighborhood. Lots of poor, very poor people.
Yeah.
And the church thought that the best way to be of some use was to invest in a neighborhood like Fort Greene by providing them with the tools that they could use to empower themselves. And I think they did a wonderful job, because we had this storefront on Fulton Street,
Yeah.
and we called it the Fulton Street Center, and members of our congregation volunteered their services in a vast number of ways. I think your husband was giving out free law advice there.
Yes, free legal advice.
Yeah.
And other people were helping with taxes. Basically what I did was referral to agencies,
Right.
social service agencies in the area. Because a lot of people really were not familiar with what was available out there to them. So we did that.
And I was on the cleaning crew for a start. And then I worked for a while with English as a second language program. Well, no, literacy, helping people to learn to read and write. Among the other things the church did was to hire a full-time director, a man from the neighborhood, and he did a terrific job in organizing people. He organized block associations all over. He helped people put together committees to address police brutality, rent problems, landlord problems, sanitation department problems. In other words, giving them the tools they needed to take on the city bureaucracy.
Right. And to know how to do it, who to
Yes.
see, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
The other thing is, one of the issues at that time in Brooklyn was the fact that the schools were totally segregated, of course, because of neighborhoods. And at that time, there was an organization that was putting a lot of pressure on the Board of Education to do something about integrating the schools, and they came up with a lot of ideas, this particular committee. And one of the ideas was to exchange students students from an all-black school would go to a school with all white, and they would exchange.
They did this by making one school
Right.
grades 1 through 3,
Right.
and the other school 4 to 7,
Ah.
so that the kids 1 to 3 all went to one school,
Right.
and that had some bad effects, I think. The people in Brooklyn Heights were paired with a school in a black neighborhood,
Yeah.
and the result of that was people who could afford to took their kids out of school and
Right.
sent them to private school,
Ah.
which was not helpful, but
No. But
they-
the thing is, these things were tried, and
Yeah.
other things also. The main thing was to integrate the schools. And of course, we all knew there's no way you could integrate it because they were by neighborhoods.
Right.
But with this exchange, it worked, but not 100%. But it was a good try.
yeah.
You know, one of the schools that was very involved in that, which was not a public school, was St. Anne's.
How were they involved?
Well, they gave scholarships.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sometimes I
They
think
cherry
that has
picked.
to, yeah,
They cherry
Of course they
picked.
has to happen, right?
Yeah.
So,
right.
did you both raise families in Brooklyn?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Our children were in the Unitarian Church had a very excellent Sunday school program. So our kids, and they had it up through junior high.
Hmm.
And the volunteers were the parents.
And did the children go to the Fort Greene storefront at all?
I don't recall seeing kids there at all.
How about the kids in junior high, the older kids,
yeah.
did they?
It seems to me, I remember seeing the results of an art Saturday,
Yeah.
where kids from the neighborhood and kids from our church all came together on a Saturday and did drawings. Because I remember seeing the drawings all over the walls.
Right.
So there was that kind of involvement.
Okay.
I think that the most significant thing, which I wanted to talk about it, is Anne and I started doing volunteer work at the Brooklyn House of Detention, which was just down the block. And the way we started is we started out taking books, you know, because we started making visits, but we found that the men were thoroughly bored, and one of the things they asked for were books. So Anne, of course, had a good resource of books, and we brought books in, and the men took it over and set up their own library.
Hmm.
And there were a couple of them who were helping other men who were close to being illiterate and helping them teaching. And then I think LIU became involved
New York Community College.
New York Community College involved in reading, in the teaching reading.
Now, in that detention center, was it racially diverse, or was it primarily black people, or was it all men?
It was all men.
It was all men.
And the majority of the inmates were black or Hispanic.
Mm-hmm.
No, but you can't call it that. They weren't inmates because
Detainees?
these men
They were detainees.
were detainees,
Yeah.
and they languished
Yeah.
there waiting for a hearing for months and months and months. And the reason they did is because they came from poor families. They didn't have bail money. So that was the other thing that we did.
Yeah.
We made a proposal to our church to give us $10,000 that we could use for bail money, and Anne and I worked it out whereby the men we bailed out we had a criteria that we set up ourselves. If they were married, had children, and they had a job that they could go to, or were willing to get a job. And the highest amount that we would do it is $250.
And do you remember, were you able to actually get some people out using
Yeah,
those criteria?
Oh, yes, we
Oh,
followed
yes.
them up,
Yeah.
and the
There were
fortunate.
people there who didn't have $50.
Oh,
Can you imagine?
and by keeping the bail low, we made sure we weren't dealing with big-time criminals.
Right.
These
No.
were people who had committed
Well,
social
250
infractions.
was the most that we
Yeah.
ever did.
Right.
But we were dealing mostly around $50, $100, $125 and so on. We also had a criteria. If it was a man who had a family and children, that he could
Right.
continue supporting his family. And Lou, Anne's husband, was able to get jobs for them.
And what did he do for a living, or how did he help them secure jobs?
Well, Lou was a union official with a union that had a lot of plants in Brooklyn that made things out of paper like boxes and bags and plates, and plants that had a lot of low-skilled jobs. And this was in the 70s, and there was a lot of there were a lot of jobs around in that. So people came out, and he would go to the plant owner and tell him the situation, and the guy would get a job.
Wow, that's
And,
remarkable.
and then he would become a member of the union and have health insurance.
Wow, so
And
you
pay dues.
so you two really did really quite a lot to give a lot of people that needed assistance.
Well,
And you should
actually,
be
we
very
did-
proud of that.
We did more than that. Not only did we help the men we got the men started in setting up their own library. But the other thing that we did is because there were men there for the lack of $50, $75 and so on, that we decided to propose to the church a proposal of $10,000 that we could use, and it was for people who had a very low bail.
Right, yeah, that's what you were saying.
Yeah,
Right.
the church was happy to do this because they had set aside a large sum of money to invest in this sort of thing. It was called a social investment fund.
Right.
And that's where our money came from.
Right.
And Marcia and I did this for about 2 years, bailing people out, going to court with them when their cases came up.
Working with their families.
Yeah. And it was an all-consuming job.
It sounds like an enormous amount of work.
But
And
we
it
bailed
was
about
wonderful.
we bailed out 24 men in that.
Wow.
And we only had one man renege.
Wow.
And he was the first one we bailed out. And after that, we refused to take any more referrals from religious people who were working in the jail, like
right.
priests and nuns and ministers.
Exactly.
Right, right.
I figured they didn't have a good enough. They looked at everybody from a sympathetic point of view.
Yeah. Well, you know what? One of the things that we did, and I, my background as a social worker certainly helped with this, is Anne and I decided that there had to be a criteria, and we had to know a bit about the man and his family and
Right.
what was out there waiting for him,
Right,
etc.
Yeah, you were saying.
To make sure that it was something that was going to work,
Right.
because we had to return that money to the church. Anyway, that's what we promised.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, do you, I mean, looking at your experience and how you became involved, and obviously we're very motivated to help, I mean, do you think something like that could be usable today?
Well, first
Oh,
of all, I want to
absolutely.
say this was before drugs.
Okay.
It absolutely,
Yeah.
it was like a time of innocence.
Yeah, there was a
that
time.
all of these things could happen. The community organization, the community coming together and helping themselves to take control of their lives in the neighborhood they lived in. The work we did with men in the jail, it couldn't have happened once drugs came in. The
Right.
picture changed completely.
Right.
That's very interesting. I've done now 6 or 7 of these, and no one has made that connection, but in my head, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Because you start to see the big shift in the late 70s and early 80s
Yes,
into
yes.
much more
Right.
serious crime, violence against each other, and you're right, I'm sure drugs had a significant role in that.
Well, and they destroyed the families and the communities.
Right. Anne and I screened the men very carefully, and we had a rigid criteria.
Yeah.
One, the man had, he had a family
Mhm.
that, and we didn't worry about jobs because Lou, Anne's husband, if they didn't have jobs, Lou would find a job for
Right,
them.
right.
The other thing is that we became involved, we got to know the family also.
That's good.
We met with the wives, the family, we got to know the family.
If the bail was in the upper end of our range, we often said to the family, I know you can't come up with the whole $250, but how about $50? And
That's right.
and so that they were invested in seeing that this
Right.
person showed up to court.
Right,
So
right.
That was the other thing.
Yeah, so
Right.
that we could get our bail money back.
Well, that's very
It
good.
really worked out very well.
And we'd also go to court with them.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we did is, if it was necessary, and usually by that time we would have gotten to know the person quite well in the family. We would write letters to the court
Mm-hmm.
as a recommendation,
Mhm.
and why we would tell them why
Right,
we felt that this person wouldn't jump bail.
right.
Well,
Because that's what the court was
Yeah.
interested in, making
And
sure
it certainly
they show
didn't
up.
help, didn't hurt that our bailee would show up in court with two do-gooder ladies.
Right. That's right.
But, you know, the courts,
We were like angels of mercy.
courts in Brooklyn they were little fiefdoms. There was one judge that wouldn't allow us in the courtroom.
Oh,
We walk in the door and he would say, get them out of my court.
really?
Didn't want us in there at all. And they ran things the way they wanted.
And you would just sit silently, basically in silent support, and he didn't want you in the courtroom?
Didn't want us in the courtroom. And they had that kind of power. One of our bailees ended up going up to Greenhaven, you know.
Mm-hmm. Correctional, Green
Yeah,
Haven
and when he
Correctional Facility.
stood trial, he was found guilty and sent to Greenhaven. I guess he'd been up there 3 or 4 months, and we'd get a letter from the warden inviting the two of us to come up and address an inmate group on community involvement
Wow.
in the penal system. And so we came up.
We drove up to Greenwood.
Greenhaven, and
They gave us lunch.
yeah, we taken on a little tour, and then we met with this inmate group that were discussing community involvement. And it was a very interesting experience. They were so proud. They showed us their oldest inmate. He was like 87.
Well,
And
they
he'd
would-
been there forever.
But how about the little old man?
That is the little old man.
But they would, he would do something, and they would get him back. He would go out. He would be discharged. But as soon as the weather got cold, he'd go into a supermarket and steal something.
Oh, that was the guy at the house of detention.
That was at the house of
Yeah,
detention.
no, the guy up in Greenhaven had been there for killing.
Oh
his
yeah,
wife.
that's a whole different thing.
And they trotted him out. He was their mascot.
Right. Wow, that's
It
interesting.
But
was
those were interesting.
It really was interesting to get to be so familiar with that whole part of life
Right.
that so many people find terrifying. I remember when we asked the inmates at the detainees at the Brooklyn House, we called the House of D, to do some artwork that we could share with the people at our church as a sort of thank you for their involvement. So we came in with all these paintings and we hung them up all
Not
over
only
the social
paintings,
hall.
poetry.
Yes, and the reaction of the people in our church was, oh my God, you know, they can paint, they can write poetry, they're artists. They were astounded because, like so many other people, these were semi-human almost, you know?
The other thing that happened, which I always think of as one of the most positive things, during the course of doing this, there was one man who came in, and as far as we were concerned, we weren't interested in why they were there at all. But he took to the fact that we were bringing in books, and by that time LIU was sending in students who were teaching reading, etc. And he got a group of men together. I can't remember his name, but anyway, they started a little newspaper, and he was there for several months, and finally, they're always there for several months until they get a court hearing. But after he got out and he was on his own, we met him a couple of times,
Yeah.
and he had landed a job with his court-appointed attorney, and as far as we knew, for many years he worked with him.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna wrap it up a little bit here because we're about
Okay.
20 minutes in, so we're trying to, you know, give a lot of people their, you know, some time. But, you know, everything that you've said to me it's just so remarkable and so impressive, and I hope you realize how powerful and how important that work was. I mean, truly, you know, that's very special stuff.
Well, it was very rewarding. It was very rewarding, and
Yeah.
for me, it was seeing this person get back to their families,
Yeah.
and we can thank Lou
Yeah.
for making it possible, because he would make sure that that there was a job for them.
Well, this has certainly been an inspiration. I want to thank you both for participating. If residents or staff members were interested in talking to you more about this, would you be open to that?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
yes.
Thank you so much, ladies.
The
This
little
is
ladies
fun.